It is a blessing to have Spiritism in our lives, bringing enlightened answers and the tools we need to succeed in this evolution. At this time, we'd like to begin our talk series. Have you ever asked yourself why you were born with that difficult sibling? Or why you feel closer to a friend than a family member? Well, to answers like these, we have, and many others, we'll have our dear friend Peter Hayes talking and giving some of these answers to us. He will be speaking about Family School for Redemption. And Peter Hayes has been an active member of the Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey for many years. He has done lectures on the doctrine in spirit in different states and participated in several episodes of Living Spring on Kardec Radio. He has a background in theater as a playwright, literary manager, and he has published several children's books with his wife, Betty Rose. Professionally, Mr. Hayes is currently involved with commercial real estate, and we would like to welcome Mr. Hayes to the podium. Thank you.
Hi there. Our families can be such joy in our lives. We can feel like we're the luckiest people in the world to have the family members that we have. Then again, sometimes our families drive us up the wall. Sometimes we look and go, who are these people? Why am I here? Why am I in this particular family? Is that merely a coincidence? Spiritism says no. The families that we're in provide us all kinds of opportunities to learn spiritual lessons, because it is through our families that we learn so much. Here's just a few of the things that we learn, a few of the trials that we might go through. Love. Love is essential. It's the foundation of all families. What about mentoring? Absolutely. A good family provides mentoring. Patience? Oh, yes. What about setting priorities in our families? Frequently, we have to do that. What about nurturing and support? Very similar to mentoring, but different, because these words often have multiple meanings. What about tragedy and loss? Unfortunately, we're going to be going through those in our families, and those too are major trials. Setting boundaries? Well, if we don't set boundaries within our families or know how to do that, it's going to cause a lot of problems for us. What about responsibility? My little talk today is going to emphasize responsibility. And again, these are just a few examples. There are lots of others one could come up with. Forgiveness is another big one that I'm going to emphasize today, because unfortunately, sometimes we're betrayed by people in our family. And what about bonding? Bonding is absolutely crucial in families. Children need to bond with their parents in a healthy way from the very beginning, and it makes a huge difference what can happen later on. What about communication in families? Absolutely essential. We need to be able to know how to communicate with our families, and so forth and so on. All of these, again, are examples of trials, and sometimes trials of the heart are the hardest of them all. And the gospel does also tell us that sometimes the most difficult trials that we're going through are signs that we're near the end of a difficult trial, and that we are about to go through a new advancement, spiritually speaking. But the kinds of trials we go through are all examples of the process of reincarnation. And it is reincarnation that turns the home into a school for souls. But what's the big deal about reincarnation in the first place? Well, I'm going to take a few minutes here and do a little bit of Spiritism 101. Question 167 and question 171 of the Spirit's book talk about the purpose and basis of reincarnation. And question 167, in answering the purpose of reincarnation, says atonement and the progressive betterment of humankind. So by atonement, what's meant by that is that if we've made any kinds of mistakes, any kind of wrongdoing from prior incarnations, the new incarnation gives us a new opportunity. And the progressive betterment of humankind implies that we not only try to improve ourselves, but we're trying to help one another as well. And certainly we do this through our families. And the progressive betterment of humankind implies, again, the kind of responsibility that we have. Question 171. Well, in question 167, it talks about the justice that is part of God's justice. But why justice? Well, justice implies a few things. First of all, question 803 of the Spirit's book emphasizes the law of equality, that we're all equal in God's eyes, and that we all are subject to the same kind of consequences of action and reaction, but also all spirits have an equal opportunity to advance. And question 171 carries this idea of justice by saying that part of the purpose of reincarnation is, yes, it's part of God's justice, but it also, question 171 describes God as kind of like a father, benevolent father, who wants to give his children a new opportunity to improve themselves, and that's where reincarnation comes in. But also question 171 emphasizes that all spirits strive for perfection, and therefore reincarnation provides this. But this idea of striving for perfection, it means we have a natural desire and a natural instinct to try to improve. Sure, we could be rebelling like mad. We may stay in the same place for quite a while, but one way or another, we're going to improve. One of the reasons families exist is because God has made us social. Family ties are part of the social law, and reincarnation points out the differences between spiritual ties and blood ties. And there's a deep connection between spiritual ties and family ties. A lot of times when we think about our families, we think about our blood ties, right? We think about our ethnicity, we think about who our ancestors might have been. I could spend the whole day up here talking about my family and my family's history, but if I did that, I'd be kind of missing the point. Because question 203 of the Spirit's book emphasizes a couple of very important points. First of all, the soul is indivisible. And since parents are providing only biological life to their children and they're not transferring part of their soul to their children, this implies that spiritual ties are more important and more profound than blood ties. Does that mean blood ties don't count? Not at all. Because blood ties provide an important bond between members of a family. Blood ties help deepen family members' commitment to one another. But question 206 of the Spirit's book emphasizes the following point. It says, look, if you really want to venerate your ancestors, the way to do that is to simply emulate their good qualities. You don't have to brag about who your ancestors were and say, well, you know, my ancestor was Abraham Lincoln, that kind of thing. But not only should we try to emulate the good qualities of our ancestors, but we should also be mindful not to emulate the bad qualities. Whether it's our ancestors or even recent family members that have disincarnated, it's very easy for families, if they're not paying attention, to kind of transfer dysfunctional behavior from one generation down to the next. And so, as members of a family, it is important that we do our best to have consciousness, notice the not so good patterns of behavior within our family, and then see if maybe we can do our part to try to change that. The gospel, according to Spiritism, emphasizes that there is a link, an inseparable link between reincarnation and family ties. And it does this in chapter 4, number 18. It emphasizes that reincarnation actually strengthens family ties because spirits are drawn together by affinity, by similar interests and affection. But this chapter also goes on to emphasize that spirits will actually follow one another into the same family, into the same circle of friends, same acquaintances, maybe the same neighbors, and so forth. And one of the things this implies is that there's some decision-making going on in the spirit world ahead of time. But also, this comment in the Gospel in chapter 4 kind of makes the answer to question 204 of the Spirit's book a little bit self-evident, because question 204 of the Spirit's book is asking whether or not our family ties exist beyond our present lives. And the answer is yes, absolutely. But it goes on to make the following point, that these relationships that we have from prior incarnations, as they continue from one family into the next, for instance, can often be the reasons why sometimes we connect really well with certain members of our families and sometimes we do not. Sometimes siblings get along really well, sometimes siblings never got along almost from the very beginning. And we kind of wonder, well, what's going on here? Why is that really happening? Well, the answer, there's no way to answer it in one general way except to say that it depends upon the prior history, perhaps, of the spirits that make up that particular family. Because the kind of issues and problems that get brought up between individuals are numerous. So there's multiple answers to a question of why do certain family members get along and some don't. Yes, it can certainly be an example of things that are going on between family members that they're aware of at the very moment, but there may be a deeper reason for why some of the things that are happening between family members is going on. Our prior history also can explain why sometimes we have a lot of joy in our families and sometimes families can be very painful places. A healthy, good family tries to provide enough love and support for happiness and even survival. But sadly, a lot of families can be very dysfunctional, and sometimes families cause a lot of problems for their members. But regardless of the kind of family we might have, regardless of the kind of situation we're in, reincarnation puts our position within our families into a much deeper perspective. We'll see how the animation works here. Okay. Here's a simple metaphor. A family is kind of like a stage that's going to provide the backdrop for the journey that's going to occur between the spirits that make up that family. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to spend a few minutes and give you an example. The third book of the Andre Louise series is Missionaries of the Light. You may be familiar with this example I'm going to give you, but here it goes. In Missionaries of the Light, there's a lot of focus on the process of reincarnation, and Andre Louise gets to observe the process of reincarnation in much more detail. And he gets to observe a particular case involving 3 individuals. They are Segismundo, Adelino, and Raquel. Adelino and Raquel are husband and wife living on Earth. They have one child named Joao, and they have a fairly good life together. Segismundo is in the spirit world. Segismundo wants to incarnate into the family of Adelino and Raquel. He wants to be their second son. He not only wants to, he needs to. And Adelino and Raquel agreed to have Segismundo as their second son when they were still in the spirit world. But there's a problem. What is the problem? Well, the one who explains it to us is Alexander. Alexander is a high-level spirit. He's the spirit teacher of Andre Louise, and Alexander is the one who's often the source of wisdom in the book Missionaries of the Light. And the problem is this. When Adelino, the father, goes to sleep at night and goes out of his body, he encounters the presence of Segismundo, doesn't quite know who he is, but he encounters the presence of Segismundo, his future son, and he's repelling him. And this is really causing a lot of problems because it's interfering with the ability of Segismundo to incarnate into this particular family. So why is this going on? Alexander explains to us, and Alexander knows. First of all, Alexander was asked to help with this problem, but Alexander is asked to help because he knows Adelino, Raquel, and Segismundo from their prior incarnation together. They were all friends. And Alexander points out that Adelino and Segismundo helped him, and he's now much higher up in the spirit world. Alexander describes Segismundo as a decent person in many ways, and so is Adelino. But there was a problem in their prior incarnation together. Adelino and Raquel were also husband and wife in their prior incarnation. We don't know all the details, but this is kind of the gist of what happens. Segismundo and Raquel had an affair. Adelino found out it was probably Adelino who challenged Segismundo to a duel to defend his honor, because this was probably the 19th century around that time. And Segismundo killed Adelino in a duel. Segismundo had made promises to Raquel. He didn't keep them. For one thing, he was a criminal. Perhaps he was more interested in having Raquel, but not necessarily committing to her. But whatever happened there, he didn't fulfill his promises. And as a result, Raquel presumably was disgraced and goes into a life of prostitution. So by the time Raquel disincarnates and by the time Segismundo disincarnated, they and Adelino are all in the lower zones of the spirit world, and they're full of anger, bitterness, and they stay in the lower zones for quite a while. And Alexander explains all of this to us. But then eventually they get out of the lower zones, and what happens is they promise to incarnate again as a family, and that Segismundo will be the son of Adelino and Raquel. But the problem at the moment when Alexander's asked to help is that Segismundo is being repelled by Adelino, as I mentioned. And so Alexander steps in to see what he can do to help. Alexander visits the family of Raquel and Adelino and their son Joao one night. It's after a day of work. Adelino's not in a particularly good mood. Raquel picks up on this, and the environment in this family is kind of tense at the moment. So what does Alexander do? He uses magnetism to try to reach Joao, their child. Joao is a very angelic child, and Joao prays with his mother. Raquel is a little more advanced than her husband Adelino, and this, by the way, is rather common in relationships. Frequently, one person in a relationship is a little more advanced than the other and they sometimes take a little more responsibility for the relationship, and that's what's going on here. So Alexander persuades Joao through magnetism to talk to his father. Daddy, what's wrong? What's going on? And as Adelino realizes how he's coming across, this begins to change him a little bit, and he begins to realize how he is. And that's the first step. The next day, Adelino and Raquel and their son Joao pray together. And then that sets the environment for that evening when Raquel and Adelino go to sleep at night. As they sleep, they go out of their bodies. I'm sure many of you know this, but that's what the cords attached to their body is all about. And this is being done to set up a meeting. When Raquel goes out of her body, Raquel meets her disincarnate maternal grandmother, and they're happy to see each other, and they pray together. And Raquel is vibrating in a certain level within the spiritual plane in which she does not see her husband or anybody else, just her maternal grandmother. And so they pray, and this indirectly helps Adelino. When Adelino goes out of his body, he's a little shaky. He moves around in the spirit world with some discomfort. And one of the reasons this is happening is because Adelino, through magnetism, is kind of bound to Segismundo via hatred. Adelino soon encounters the spirit of Segismundo, soon to be his future son, and he flips out, he panics, and he wants nothing to do with Segismundo. He treats Segismundo like he's, say, some homeless person who he assumes is going to be a threat to him. And this really upsets Segismundo, and Segismundo begs Adelino for forgiveness. And Alexander and Andre Louise are observing all of this. They can see everything. Alexander then steps in and tries to reason with Adelino, and he reminds Adelino that if we are to serve the Lord, we have to be able to let go of the kind of negative energy that we store deep within our souls, which can cause us a lot of problems. Alexander finally reaches Adelino and is able to get him to change. Then what happens is that Alexander also reminds Adelino of the promises that he'd made in the spirit world. Now, it's important to remember, Adelino doesn't really know who Segismundo is. He doesn't remember the duel, he doesn't remember the betrayal and all that stuff. And it's just as well, because it makes this process a lot easier. So then what happens is that Adelino and Raquel wake up, they remember a little bit of their dream, but more importantly, the environment of this family is now changing. It's becoming more loving, more calm, and more relaxed, and that allows for what occurs next. Soon after that, conception occurs. And one of the things that happens in the book that's described in pretty vivid detail is that Alexander and other high-level spirits use magnetism to make sure that the right sperm from Adelino fertilizes Raquel's egg. And it goes on to make another point that's really engaging. Missionaries of the Heart says, Alexander points this out, that Adelino could not conceive before. Why? Because he was so full of anger and rage and hatred, which he didn't really even understand in the first place. And it was actually preventing him from conceiving. Now, does this mean that all parents who have some anger and rage can never conceive, or all would-be parents? No, that would be very simplistic to say that. But this is one example where, in Adelino's case, he wasn't able to conceive because his emotions were actually interfering with the biological process. And also, I should mention really quickly that Alexander and the high-level spirits are not interfering with the biological process through magnetism, but when they make sure the right sperm fertilizes Raquel's egg, they're kind of helping things a little bit, but not, just a little bit. Maybe more than we might think. But Alexander makes an important point. He says that hate, when there's hate, you cannot create life out of hate, only through love. The next step is that Segismundo begins to prepare for the actual process of incarnation. And in this image, Alexander and other high-level spirits help Segismundo's spirit begin to contract so that his spirit will go into the fetus that's just beginning to gestate inside Raquel's womb. Now, we don't know everything or very much about what happens afterwards, but we are told that Segismundo is in fact born into the family of Adelino and Raquel as their second son. Are they going to get along? Is this effort, which a lot of effort was put into this, is it going to work? Who knows? Are they going to clash sometimes? Yes, probably. They have their work cut out for them, one can imagine. But the important thing here is that The Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 14, number 9, St. Augustine emphasizes that as the parents, Raquel and Adelino have to make sure they take care of Joao. And one of the ways they have to do this is to remember that there's only really one password that God has provided, and the password is love. And that in order to have love, we have to be able to forgive. We have to forgive offenses and things that have happened from people in the past, and we simply can't flourish, and love can't flourish where there's a lot of hatred. That's said in the Gospel according to Spiritism, and it's pretty much the exact same thing that Alexander is emphasizing in the book Missionaries of the Light. Suppose the roles were reversed here. Suppose that Segismundo incarnated as the father and Adelino came back as the son. Would that work? Well, Adelino needs to learn forgiveness. And the reason that would be more difficult is because good parents love their children unconditionally. Do children love their parents unconditionally? In many ways they do, but it's a little harder that way. But I think all of us who are parents know that we will, even when our children drive us up the wall and we want to, we still love our children unconditionally. And so it's much easier for Adelino to learn the trial of forgiveness and really internalize what he got some help with recently by being the father. But that doesn't mean that Segismundo doesn't have a job to do. Segismundo, as the son, must also do his part. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, chapter 14, number 3, it talks about one of the 10 commandments. The 10th commandment, one of the 10 commandments is honor your mother and your father. And the Gospel then goes on to say that an inability for any of us to love our parents would point to an inability to love anything or anyone much at all. And that children who have no gratitude for their family, their parents, and so forth, they're going to be miserable. And children have their own little trials to learn. And one of them that's emphasized in the Gospel is that children must learn respect for their parents, caring for their parents, and deference toward their parents. And Segismundo really has to do this because, remember, in their prior incarnations, Segismundo betrayed both Raquel and Adelino. So we'll have to, we don't know how that's going to work out, but that's certainly one of the challenges there. And in conclusion, to advance spiritually, we need to be mindful of the positions that we have within our families. And we need to take responsibility for the positions that we have within our families. And parents take the lead in that. Parents are the ones that bear more of the responsibility in setting the right kind of tone within their family. Question 208 of the Spirit's book does emphasize that to some extent, that parents take responsibility for the education of their children, and if they really ignore that responsibility, they could be held accountable. But another way to look at this is what St. Augustine says. St. Augustine, in talking to parents in chapter 14, number 9, emphasizes that the purpose of any soul incarnating on earth is simply one thing: spiritual advancement. And this is connected to the answer in question 167 that I brought up before, in which part of the purpose of reincarnation is the progressive betterment of humankind. So if we can advance spiritually, then we can then contribute to the progressive betterment of humankind. And sometimes all we need to do is just be able to do that within our own families. It's not about going out and trying to save the whole world. Just doing it within our families can be plenty for many of us. But St. Augustine also says something else here. He says to parents, remember, your children are here for spiritual advancement, so make that clear to yourselves as parents, and then use all the love you can to bring your children closer to God, because it's part of the responsibility that parents have. So this idea of bringing their children closer to God is really crucial in a family. I would like to wrap up by recommending a book on parenting, and it's called The Parent's Handbook. It offers a lot of good information about parenting techniques and some of the mistakes that parents can easily make, because let's face it, all parents are going to make mistakes. When I said before I was mentioning responsibility, I wasn't suggesting that it should then become some kind of guilt trip for parents, because there's no such thing as a perfect parent. Certainly children are not perfect, but no parent is perfect. And they're not expected to be perfect. Remember, God's forgiveness is infinite. What matters, and also God's trials that are given to us via our children, we wouldn't have them if we weren't able to handle it. But as long as we're really trying, as long as we're really sincere about trying to improve, then that's when we have that ability to kind of release that stuff within our paraspirit that needs to get released, the same as Adelina. I just want to say a couple of other things. My Spiritist Center, Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey, has a special program for parenting. It's my wife, Betty Rosenzweig, is one of the participants, and so is Lucy Ribeiro. And the ability to combine good, sound psychological practices with Spiritism can be one of the ways that Spiritist centers can help families. Certainly through all the wonderful programs that Spiritist centers offer via children's programs and so forth. But also, if a Spiritist center can do a separate program for parents, that would also be very useful, because it's one of the ways in which, again, we can do our part to try to help bring our children closer to God. But in a way, all family members should be trying to help one another, bringing one another closer to God. And when I say that, I don't mean trying to ram some kind of belief system or religion or whatever down a child's throat or even a family member's throat. It's simply about learning kindness and charity and love and all the things that we realize are essential to our happiness. And if we try to help one another become closer to God, it is an opportunity that each of us can take advantage of. And the beauty of that is that there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of ways that family members can do that within their own families. Thank you.